Welcome to the Get Real Movies podcast. My name is Daniel Chadwick Shubat. I am your host, and this is episode 25, halfway to 50. Today we will be talking about the movie Unstoppable with none other than the subject of the film, Anthony Robles. We talk about the film, we talk about the performances, especially Jerome Jarrell's performance as him. We talk about the wonderful cast, including Jennifer Lopez, Bobby Cannavale, Michael Pena, Don Cheadle, and just his amazing story that finally made its way to screen. He said the day after he won the college wrestling championship, he started getting calls about making this movie, and that was back in the late 2000s. So this is a story that took a while, as a lot of these true story films do, but I'm really glad that it's finally here, and I'm really glad that I got to chat to Anthony about it. So without much further ado, here's my conversation with Anthony Robles. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Anthony Robles to the podcast. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about Unstoppable. But I guess for people who haven't seen the film and maybe don't know your story, I'd love if you give a little bit of a lowdown about who you are and your story.
Sure. My name is Anthony Robles. My story starts with my mom. I was born to a mom who had me, and I was born missing my leg. The doctors had no idea that was going to happen, but it happened. And luckily, I was blessed with a mom who raised me to believe that I was capable of anything I set my mind to, that having a missing leg wouldn't hold me back in my life, that I could be unstoppable. And so, as I was growing up, I wanted to be like any other kid, but wrestling, it changed my life because at 14 years old, it allowed me to show people what I was truly capable of. I wasn't very good at the very beginning, but, I loved that one-on-one aspect of the sport. And I loved how it was a lot like my life, just wrestling through life. And with the love and support of my mom and my siblings, I was able to really prove to the world what I could do, and that eventually led to becoming a national champion. But there are some ups and downs in between there. And, I faced some family challenges, but, overall, it was that message of being unstoppable, of not allowing my challenge to become an excuse for my life that helped me to overcome it.
That's awesome. And I like that you name dropped the movie title. It's a very fitting movie title. I'd love to know a little bit about the process of how this film got made, because I'm sure it was a little surreal when you were first contacted about it. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that process and how this movie came about.
Yeah, it was a long process. I remember I won my title back in 2011. It was like that night that I was getting phone calls from some production companies that were interested in telling my story in film, and it was exciting, but also it was very scary, because I didn't know how they were going to tell my story, what they were going to change, and what they were going to focus on. And so we knew that it was really important to take our time, my family and I, to make sure we were comfortable with who we were going to be working with and who we would trust the story with. It ended up coming down to, it was 2018 or 19. Bailey Goldenberg, our director, who agreed to tell the story, I believe he was getting ready to work on, and he was working on Air with Ben Affleck. They're in the editing room, and they're talking about, their passion projects or what they have coming up next. And Billy had said, well, so there's a story I've been wanting to tell. It's called Unstoppable. And Ben's like, well, let me read a script. Send me a script. And Ben read it, and he fell in love with it. And, man, things just snowballed from there. Artist Equity signed on. Amazon signed on. The amazing cast started to come together. But what was really cool was that, everyone was really just respectful of my family and I, of our story, of making sure we were included through the whole process and we were comfortable with what was going on. And I just wanted to make us proud of the film. And so, being able to see the finished product, with my family, and just to know it's something that it's going to be around the rest of our lives. It's our family legacy, but it's something that we're proud of and we're happy about. That's a very special feeling. And it made that long wait, from 2011 up until 2024, 25, it made it worth it. So
yeah, I remember I talked to Jim Morris, and they made the movie The Rookie about him with Disney, and he said it was the exact same, that as soon as the big story happened, people started reaching out straight away. But I think it's obviously so important to find someone you trust to tell this story. And I want to bring it back a little bit. You mentioned your mom, how this story started with your mom, and I think that really comes through in the film. How do you think they did with showing all the tough things you and your mom and your whole family had to go through, and how did you enjoy enjoy Jennifer Lopez's performance because she's a singer by trade, but I see her in a lot of movies, and I think she did a really fantastic job here as well.
I was very happy with how they portrayed the film, with all the different elements of it and the tender things, the painful moments and memories. They were very respectful about it, and they made sure that we were comfortable with what was going to be shared, and they ran it by us first. We, as a family, we got to sit at the dinner table and read the revisions of the script as we were going through the process, in order to see what was going on, to see where they were headed, and also include our thoughts and opinions. So we say, hey, we don't like this. Hey, we're not comfortable with this. They took those things to heart. Like, okay, no problem. Don't worry about it. And as far as Jennifer goes, she's Jennifer Lopez. She's a superstar. Everybody knows who she is across the world. And so, when she signed on board to tell my mom's story, that was amazing. But with her being J-Lo, she could have easily just give me the script. I'll show up and I'll film. She took the time to get to know my mom, to speak with her, to meet with her, to hang out with her, to get the little details that make my mom, her mannerisms, the way she moves around, the way she talks. And also just, her and my mom, they bonded. They got to share just personal stuff between each other, to where my mom was able to open up and share things with Jennifer and trusted Jennifer with those stories to share with the world in a way that, it would honor my mom. Because when you watch the film, you'll see that it's not just my journey, it's my family's, but also it's really my mom's journey, what she went through, what she was able to overcome. And so Jennifer, she captured all those amazing things about my mom. And, people know why she's my hero, because of what she was able to overcome and what Jennifer was able to bring to the screen.
And I'd love to go into a specific moment. And I think it's when you tell your mom that you're going to go to Arizona State as a walk-on rather than taking a full ride at a university up north. I'd love to know did they portray that correctly, or was there a little bit more less supportive moments at the start? Because I know when we do things that our parents don't understand, sometimes they're not always as supportive as Jenny from the Block appeared on there.
My mom, when I first told her that, she was very surprised, and I could tell she definitely wanted me to go to Drexel, and they are the school that believed in me. At least with the scholarship, they put their money where their mouth was. And the coach, Jack Childs, he was amazing. Everything, it seemed right. It seemed like the right fit for me. So she definitely questioned why I was saying no to it. I think at the beginning, I didn't really have a good, solid answer, but I just felt in my heart it wasn't the right place for me to be. But the big picture for me was I didn't want to leave my family, my mom, my siblings. I didn't want to be across the country, because there are some turmoils, things going on at home around that time. And I didn't want to go away, take off and start this whole other life in Pennsylvania while my family was back here struggling. It's like, especially being expected to go out there and compete in the toughest sport out on the planet, that's mentally draining, And so I decided I need to be home with my family to support my family in Arizona. And down the road, I realized I needed their support too, all the way through. They've always been where a big part of my strength came from. So yeah, my mom struggled with the decision, but she ultimately, she supported my decision. It's like, what, you earned the opportunity to say yes or no, to do what you want to do. And she trusted me to make that decision at the end of the day to, stay at Arizona State. I was a walk-on. I took a partial academic scholarship my first 2 years there before, the wrestling scholarship came about. Yeah. I think like any parent though, it's like she wants the best for her son and she wants them to go where people are going to believe in them and support them and love them. But, she was definitely cool with me going to ASU in the big picture.
In the big picture. Yeah. And I think what you said there, that really comes through in the film, that as much as your family needed you, you needed them. And there was that support system. And I think that's something that everyone can really relate to, because having that familial support system is so important in just, growing up, even as a young adult, never mind as a kid, right? I'd love to talk about two other big supporters in your life, and that would be your coaches. So obviously your coach at high school, Coach Williams, and then Coach Charles in university. And I'd love to maybe talk about a few of the differences, because they seem like very different characters on screen. I love Michael Pena. I love Don Cheadle. You got great character actors to portray your coaches. So I'd love to talk to you about them and how you think they did with the performances as them.
Yeah, starting with Michael Pena, playing my high school coach, Bobby Williams, he did an outstanding job. Coach Williams in my life, he's like a father figure, and, he echoed my mom's words in a lot of ways. He always taught me to think positively, to find the positives in every situation, whether I won or I lost. When I come off the mat, he was right there coaching me up on all the good things that I was doing. It's like, yeah, we're not there yet, or, we need to work on this still, but you're doing this really well, so just always putting that in my head. And he treated me like I was a champ from the very beginning, just like my mom treated me. She believed in what I was capable of, and he saw me for what I was capable of. And just his kind of quiet sense of humor. Just the way he talked to me, just like, it was just very just, kind of straightforward. But whatever he said to me, I knew to take it to heart. I have so much respect for him still to this day. I got to coach with him at Mesa High for 3 years. And then, we have a wrestling club together now for local high school kids. And so we're still in touch. I'm still leaning on him for advice and input. And, I'm blessed, to have had him in my corner. For my college coach, Sean Charles, played by Don Cheadle, Don did a funny job. He captured a sense of humor. He captured just the seriousness at times from Coach Charles. And that was Coach's personality, and it was cool. Both Pena and Don Cheadle, they spent time separately with both my coaches. I had dinner with them, got to know them, and they captured those little things. And so it was cool for me to kind of hang out behind the camera and watch, the scenes, watch as they're portraying my real life coaches. I'm like, man, that's Charles right there. Man, that's Williams right there. Even some certain little phrases that they would say, but they weren't in the film. Like in one of them, we're running on the track scene with the plate, and Charles says, "Don't cheat yourself, treat yourself." That was something he would always say to us, and that's something he just shared with Don, and Don just decided to kind of put it in that scene. So all the little details, man, they captured it and they wanted to bring it to life. They did an excellent job.
Yeah, no, I think they did an excellent job as well, and I kind of love the deadpan comedy of Don Cheadle, and then kind of the goofy comedy of Michael Pena. So that was really fun to see. I'd love to talk a little bit more about specific scenes. I'd love to know which scenes you think they did like a really fantastic job on, and they really captured it, because there were some crazy ones, and the main one sticking out in my mind is when you run up this incredibly tough mountain and you get there a few hours earlier so you can make it to the top as the same time or around the same time as your teammates. And I'd love to hear about if that happened, or if they maybe Hollywoodized it, or anything like that.
No, that definitely happened. That was that scene coming up that peak, that mountain. That was the end of our Hell Week, which is basically like our initiation onto the ASU wrestling team. You survive the week, you survive all the torture, the toughest workouts coach can throw at you. If you make it up that peak, you're on the team. And so, yeah, I did show up early, like 40 minutes early to try to, get a good pace ahead of my team to make it up. So that scene where they filmed it that day, they did an amazing job. They captured it really, really well. I just remember the day we were filming that, and I have so much more appreciation and respect with how much goes into film and all the short scenes that you see, the hours that go into getting that ready to go. Because, we're going up that peak, and, I think like 50, 60 people that are going up with us, just we're filming certain areas. And Jarrell Jerome actually mentioned it in an interview. He's like, it was a tough climb, we're filming, we're going up. He's like, but honestly, he's like, nobody was complaining because we got a real life experience of what he actually went through. He's like, so it was pretty special to, kind of relive that moment, but together as a group that was telling the story of what Unstoppable is. And, we got this goal in mind, so that scene, they did a fantastic job. And that was probably the toughest thing one of the toughest things I've ever done mentally, because I remember I did fall down multiple times. I was getting cut up, and there were moments where I was getting ready to turn around and just walk back down. But, in my head, I was just telling myself, if I can take one more step, if I can just make it just around that next corner right there, and then getting to the top, that's where I earned my teammates' respect. And I think they captured that so well. And I think that scene right there, doesn't matter if you're an athlete or not, I think you can relate to it in life. It's like you're going to get knocked down, you're going to want to quit, you're going to get bloody. But if you could just have that courage to just take one more step, that mountaintop's not too far away.
I don't know. For me, I moved to Canada when I was 8. I grew up in Europe, and one of the things that was introduced to me first in Canadian history was Terry Fox and his run for cancer that he did across Canada. And sadly, he didn't make it fully across Canada, but he would run so many miles a day that he'd have to replace his prosthetic leg because it would get so bloody. And I just saw that, and that was one of the first things I thought of, is just kind of going and keeping going, and that mental strength. It was very inspiring. But I'd love to ask, in terms of on the opposite end of that spectrum, were there any things that you thought in the film maybe they didn't tell it the way it happened, whether you agreed with it or not? Maybe it made sense to not tell the full story, but were any things that they maybe Hollywoodized a little bit?
Well, I think one of the scenes, in the film, my junior year, they have me making it to the finals and losing to Iowa, to McDonough. Where in, real life, I made it to the quarterfinals that year, and I lost to somebody who ended up going to the finals and then losing to McDonough.
Okay.
So that, they changed they changed how far I went into that tournament, and who I lost to. But again, to their credit, they brought that up before they did it. They're like, hey, this is what we're thinking, for the flow of the film. And I appreciated them doing that. Just to give us that respect, because I could have just been like, hey, this is our project now. You signed the contract. This is what we're going to do, or not even tell me. Just go ahead and run with it. And I find out when I see it on the big screen. But, just to be included and for them to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. And I appreciated that. And I felt like I was comfortable with it because, the parts that were most important to me that they capture, like my faith, my family, and the certain tender moments, the painful moments that they were respectful of. There were other situations to where I was like, you know what, I'm okay with you, taking your artistic creativity here. I understand that you're trying to create a film that's based off of my story, but that's not going to be 100% on boards. The fact that they are willing to just, respect me and my wishes and what was important made me more comfortable to kind of open up and allow them to be a little bit more creative in certain areas that they felt they needed to or wanted to. And ultimately, though, I think they captured the big message. It was the overcoming those challenges and wrestling through challenges to be unstoppable.
And I 100% agree, because it's such a tough line to walk where you don't want it to be a documentary, but you also don't want to go so far from the truth that you start kind of getting rid of the actual memory of the film and what actually happened. So I think they played that line quite well. And I've noticed that, especially with a lot of people I chat to, people are usually quite happy if they're just consulted on some of these changes. So it's nice to hear they did that. You brought him up, but I wanted to talk about Jarrell Jerome last. I'd love to hear about what you thought about his performance, because I think seeing someone portray yourself on screen must be incredibly difficult, and especially such a difficult story to tell as well. So I'd love to know about your conversations with him and what your thoughts were ultimately about his performance.
Yeah, I remember I first met Jarrell. It was back in, let's see, it was 2019 that we initially met. We met in the hotel weight room, and we were in there for 2 hours just talking, just getting to know each other. And I remember him just kind of walking out. He told me, he's like, I'm going to make you proud of how I share your story. He's like, I'm going to do this right for you. And what I respected so much about Jarrell is his attention to detail, the little things. As an athlete, especially, that's something I understand is most important, is the little details. And he was like, watching my mannerisms, watching the way I interacted with people from the corner, without me knowing it. But for him, not only was he dedicated to just like, the acting portion of me, the emotions, portraying that on film, he was also dedicated with learning how to walk on crutches with the wrestling scenes. I mean, he was spending hours a day, a couple hours doing movement, learning how to walk on crutches, how to move around, how to carry things, how to go up and down the stairs, how I got in and out of a car with my crutches, and then also how to wrestle like me on the wrestling mat. Because I was a stunt double, but in order for these scenes, and I believe they came out amazingly well, the wrestling scenes, in order for us to be able to show that intensity and what I was truly capable of, it was all about what level Jarrell could bring himself to. And so he would spend hours in the wrestling room with us every day, trying to move like me, try to maneuver on the wrestling mat. And so for him to put all that together, and then also, just the pressure of working with such an amazing all-star cast. He's an incredible actor, but man, I couldn't imagine, you're with J-Lo, you're with Don Cheadle, you're with Michael Pena, and that had to have been a lot of pressure for him to deliver. But he did a phenomenal job, and he was always just, he'd ask me, he's like, how am I doing? He's like, what do you think? He's like, how would you, are you comfortable? Are you good with this? You like this? And, for him to care so much, and for us to develop this relationship, we call it a brotherhood. He's one of my buddies now. We'll catch up with him here and there. We're texting each other, just checking on each other, how the family's doing. But I could not have asked for anybody better than Jarrell to have played me. He did a phenomenal job. And, it's great when, I'm at the Toronto Film Festival, for the world premiere. I got my wife on one side and my mom on the other. I'm in between them, and they're both elbowing me in my ribs because they're like, "He got you right there. That's your manners, and that's it. The little your expressions. He killed it." So I couldn't be happier.
That's awesome. And it's so great to hear how involved you were with the film, even being a stunt double. I'd love to ask you a sporting related question, because I've noticed with a lot of these sports biopics or true stories, sometimes the level, like I played basketball in college and a little bit of soccer as well. And I see some of these films and it's just terrible level. So in terms of the wrestling level that you saw on screen, were you pretty happy with it? And did they do a good job in portraying that?
I'm very happy with the wrestling level that they were able to capture, and I got to give a huge shout out to Billy Goldenberg, our director on that, because he told me, he's like, I want to make the wrestling as authentic as possible. Leading up to us actually producing the film, he'd come out to the NCAA wrestling tournaments to watch, and he was there for a couple years in a row, just watching it. And he's like, I feel a responsibility to really do this sport, and this crowd that supports it justice, to share what they're all about and share the intensity of it. So Billy actually brought on my former assistant wrestling coach from Arizona State. His name is Brian Stith. To help design the wrestling choreography for the film. All the wrestlers that you see in the movie are former or current Division I wrestlers, so that we could bring that wrestling intensity to the screen. So yes, we had the choreography. We developed what we called a violent dance. To where we knew what we were doing. We were kind of working together. But at the same time, we're really wrestling 100% at each other, to where I'm coming off, I'm sore, Jarrell and I, we got bloody mouths here and there because, we're actually going at it. But, everyone was just so excited because it's like, man, this is intense. This is what wrestling's all about. And people can see that now. And, we got the compliments, from people within we call it the wrestling world, the wrestling community. They're messaging and sending things out like that. You guys captured wrestling. You did a great job. So I was very appreciative of that. Again, it's all the things that Billy, that, Artist Equity, that, the team, that all they focused on, those little details that made me, that made it my story, and they wanted to capture on the screen. I'm very blessed to have had that opportunity, for them to care so much, because they could have done whatever they wanted to. So that means a lot.
For sure. And a movie that came to my mind when I was watching it was Creed, in terms of they just showed the fighting, and there was no shaky cams and no cuts. They were just showing it in its purest form. And I'm not a big wrestler watcher, and it's not been a sport that I've really watched, but it definitely made me more interested and the beauty of it almost in a way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy to hear it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'd love to ask you, I guess, the final question about this film, and then we can go into the other few questions I want to ask you. But in terms of, I think you've said it already in a really beautiful way, but in terms of what is the lesson from this film, I'm guessing it's how we can be unstoppable if we put our mind to it. But I'd love to know what you'd love people to take away from your life, but specifically this film.
Yeah, what I want people to take away from the film is that, we all wrestle with a challenge. And I believe this film does a beautiful job of showing the challenges that not just me, but my mom and my family, that we wrestled through our lives. So, the world, you're going to wrestle with a challenge, but you can fight through that. You can be unstoppable. And so, in order for us to make this as relatable as possible, we had to share our pain. We had to share our down moments, our discomfort, our scars, because that's our challenge. That's our opponent that we dealt with. And so I think, and I know that, when people watch this, they're going to be able to relate in some way or another. They don't have to be an athlete. They don't have to be a wrestler to kind of get the message of the story and to feel it, when they watch it. And that's what I'm honored and excited about, is that this story is going to hopefully inspire people out there, to overcome what they're wrestling in their life.
100%. Well, I thank you so much for sharing your story a little bit with me today, and thank you for the film as well. I really enjoyed it. One question I love to ask all my guests before I let you go is, I love to know if you have any movie recommendations, either some of your favorites or something you've watched recently that, besides this movie, that you'd like to share with people.
Absolutely. So I'd say my two favorite movies, all-time favorite movies. I love Cinderella Man. It's with Russell Crowe, and just based off a true story of a boxer, James Braddock. And, I just love that one of the lines in the movie, he said, "I know what I'm fighting for. I know what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for milk." It's like he's fighting for his family. He's fighting to overcome, to fight through those challenges of life that he was dealing with. And so that was, that movie, Cinderella Man, I used to watch it all the time. But the day, so I wrestled that night, Saturday night for my championship. That day, when I was just resting and waiting, I spent that day watching that film up in my hotel room. I had lunch with my family, went back. I watched that movie before I went out there and competed to motivate me. And then also the other film I love, it's a Bronx Tale. That's definitely on my top two list right there, Bronx Tale and The Door Test. If you don't know The Door Test, I love it.
I feel like that's not really known anymore, but I think we have to bring it back for people for sure.
Yes, sir.
And yeah, honestly, Cinderella Man would motivate me for almost anything. So I totally agree there. Those are two great picks. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today. I'd love to tell people where they can find you. So if they want to learn a bit more about you or read your book or follow you on social media.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so they can follow me at my website. It's my name. It's anthonyrobles.com. And for social media, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's @arobles125.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. And it was wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you for your time. Pleasure speaking with you.
So thank you so much for listening to this episode on Unstoppable. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed chatting with Anthony about it. He is a wonderful guy, and some of the work he's doing in the community is really inspiring. And if you do get a chance, check him out. If you want to follow his journey, his website, anthonyrobles.com. And you can also follow him on social media as well, as he mentioned at the end there. If you do want to check out the film, or you haven't already, please go to Prime Video. That's where you can find this film. Well worth your time. And I do think it's a really enjoyable film. And it's great to have some more context about it and to learn about some of the things that they didn't include in the film. So thank you again to Anthony for his time. Thank you everyone for listening. Please leave a comment on Spotify, rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate it. I really do appreciate you listening. And so until next time, I've been Daniel, and we'll see you at the movies. Bye, y'all.